Let's say you're working with a client and the why gets established. You get 6 months into it, you start to see them kind of falling off the horse slightly. What are some practical tips you would give keeping your perception of the why and making sure your habits and actions align with that?
I think establishing some guardrails is really important for yourself. And a lot of that involves understanding where your weaknesses are. We work together to build strategies to mitigate those weaknesses. There are so many different ways you can cater these sort of like mitigation strategies for people. And those are really individual because what works for one person might not work for another person. I wish I could give you like a one-size-fits-all set of strategies, but it comes down to understanding yourself, recognizing where your behaviors aren't aligning with your future self that you envisioned, and developing some really, really effective strategies to mitigate where you fall off. And that's different for everyone.
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast. All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Born Primitive Podcast. How we doing, Big Tone?
Morning, Bear. Doing good.
Fall's here. Brisk 53-degree morning this morning.
Yeah, it was nice. This is my weather.
Oh man, this is it, man. I'm ready for it. And we got a double episode today recording, but first one is Julia Mitchell. Julia Mitchell is a bison rancher, a regenerative agriculture advocate, and a performance nutritionist who focuses on her clients' unique physiology, lifestyle, and health goals. Julia believes in a personalized approach, no one-size-fits-all solutions. Using the principles of muscle-centric medicine, she tailors nutrition coaching to meet diverse needs like weight loss, body comp, digestive health, hormone balance, and a support for specific health conditions. Her insights and practical tips help clients reach their health and fitness goals effectively. And you can follow her on Instagram at Julia the Nutritionist. And this is kind of right up Tony and I's alley, so we're really excited to have this conversation. But Julia, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. So honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, I'm gonna do a non-traditional start to this episode. I was looking at your Instagram and I saw one of your tweets and I liked it, so we're just gonna roll right into that. All right, You tweeted, "A body in motion tends to stay in motion. A body at rest tends to come up with a lot of excuses." Let's unpack that a little bit.
Well, I work with a lot of people and see sort of firsthand the resistance that people experience to either making changes in their lives or breaking bad habits. And that is just really one thing that stuck out for me. And so that's not my quote. I didn't, I heard that somewhere, but I can't remember where. But it is so poignant. It's like, once you start moving and get going, habits, when we build habits, they compel us to do things, but then they start to control us. So those habits can be either good or they can be bad. But once we get good habits, they become almost like an autopilot. But if we have bad habits, we just tend to stick in those. And so if you're used to being sedentary and not really doing a lot, it will be a lot easier to come up with excuses to stay in that state. So yeah, people love that one. I got a lot of feedback on that.
Why I like it, because I could really relate. I'm pulling it up again. Because you're 100% right. And I think an example that comes to mind for me is like when you go on a trip, right? You've been training hard 5 days a week. You're down in nutrition. You do like a 4 or 5 day work trip. Maybe you get one workout in. You make excuses in your head, like, oh, it was a long day. I'm at the hotel. Like, let me go get a beer at the hotel bar, and whatever. And when you could go get a quick one in. But when I come back, it's harder to really get back on the wagon and train. Now, I still do it. So I have the discipline to do it, but it's harder for me those first couple workouts to really get motivated. I mean, I really have to pull out all the stops, a little extra caffeine, little extra Metallica on the drive in. And I really got to convince myself to get motivated, where once you're in autopilot, like you said. And I think that's why it's important, in my opinion, when you go on like a trip or things like that, just get a 20-minute something in, because that will keep the momentum. Like psychologically, like you could go into the hotel gym and just do air squats, push-ups, and sit-ups for literally for 20 minutes at a slow pace. Just make it really easy. That's enough to say I got it in today. I still got the momentum. But a lot of us, including myself, end up kind of conceding. I'll pick it up when I get back. And same thing with diet. So that's really what resonated with me when I read that, and I think that's probably what you were getting at.
Yeah, totally. And, I say often in clinic, something small is better than nothing at all. So, even if you go to the gym for 20 minutes, you're still going, you're still contributing to that sort of habit building the formation of that habit being built with putting on your shoes and showing up. When you get there, it doesn't really matter how it looks as much as the fact you're actually there just doing something. And so I really resonate with what you said, because when you're trying to get back on track, people really put themselves in this sort of black or white, all or nothing type thinking when it comes to nutrition and fitness. But understanding that, something small versus nothing at all is such a crucial first step, is really important to emphasize with folks. And if you're out there and you experience this kind of resistance, whether it is you're trying to start something new, or you're coming back from a holiday, or something stressful in your life has really like thwarted your progress or your flow, just doing something is so clutch, and it can be a lot easier than people think it is.
As a practitioner, when you're trying to address kind of that resistance, I would say there can be a bit of a complex nature to it depending on the individual. How do you approach it? Because like Bear's example, me personally knowing Bear, it's like, yeah, even if it takes a week or two, like he's going to get back on the train. Whereas you, I'm sure in your practice, you see individuals where like it's been years that are stacked on top of each other of kind of a body not in motion. So when how do you individualize kind of addressing that resistance and kind of know, okay, here's my starting point to get them to maybe start to move or just perceive even their daily habits in a different way?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I do think, like you had alluded to already, it is somewhat individual. So every person I will approach differently depending on where they're coming from. But a common pattern is we start really high level. It's like, why do you want to be healthy in the first place? What is the why behind why you're, trying to achieve health, or why you're here with me? Because usually people don't go to pay to work with a nutritionist because they want to stay the same. There's something motivating them. And so if we start addressing the high level why, really bringing out like the reason behind it. Do you want to age well so you can play with your grandkids? Are you faced with some blood work that's showing that you're on track to, develop a chronic disease of some kind? Usually there's a big why, and reminding people of that kind of ongoing throughout, because the why is the foundational piece of any journey. It's like, I would love to know like what your why is, why you started, what drives you on a daily basis to achieve peak and optimal health. For me, I want to be a really fit mom. I have really small kids, age 3 and 4. I want to be able to crush workouts with my sons. I want to be able to hike mountains with my sons. I want to be able to be like one of the fittest, 56-year-old women around. Some of these things are the reason that drives me. And so when I get into a lull, or I even go about trying to do something that I've never done before, that is really the justification for me as to why I'm going to go into it with more commitment. So I tend to start really high level with people. What is your why? And then let's define some standards around your lifestyle based on that why.
And then what are some methods as you, like, let's say you're working with a client and the why gets established, but as you get, and I'm sure we've all experienced this on some level, you get 6 months into it and you start to see them kind of falling off the horse slightly. What are some practical tips or takeaways you would give the listeners on kind of, like you said, rooting back into that why? But I'm sure it's usually, it's not as, if it were simple as that, everyone would do it. So what are some tips and takeaways to, like, hey, not only keep consistent on the why behind it, but here are some other practical ways to make sure you're keeping your perception of the why and making sure your habits and actions align with that?
I think establishing some guardrails is really important for yourself. And a lot of that involves understanding where you fail, or where your weaknesses are. And so I do work with people on, identifying their weaknesses. We work together to build strategies to mitigate those weaknesses or foreshadow failure. So if you're someone who, middle of the day when you're working, stress overwhelms you because you've been on 6 hours of Zoom calls and you tend to stress eat, what is the strategy we need to put in place to make sure that you're choosing the right foods, or that you're avoiding the bad ones? Does it mean we don't even buy them? Does it mean, they're on the top shelf of your pantry? Does it mean you keep stuff in the freezer? Like, there are so many different ways you can cater these sort of like mitigation strategies for people. And those are really individual, because what works for one person might not work for another person. So it is really about foreshadowing your failure. And that, I wish I could give you like a one size fits all kind of like set of strategies, but it comes down to understanding yourself, recognizing where your behaviors aren't aligning with your future self that you envisioned, and developing some really, really effective strategies to mitigate where you fall off. So yeah, that would be and that's different for everyone. So,
Well, I think, have either of you read the book Atomic Habits? By
Mm-hmm.
chance, have you read
It's been
it?
a while, but yeah.
Okay. I'm like halfway through. And I think I'm going to butcher this in the theme of it. So whoever the author is, I'm sorry. But I think what we're getting at is it has to drill down a layer deeper than the surface level stuff. Right. And I was thinking about this. Okay. You know, little shit that I was trying to tighten up in my life that are not big things, but it was frustrating me that because especially with a military background, discipline has always been important to me. And like, you know what I mean? You get that, you can never like get rid of it. But little things like, you know, when I change my clothes, when I get home from work, I would like just kind of throw them in a heap on the dresser, and I'd throw like sweatpants on, you know, get comfortable. And then before I know it, by the end of the week, like I have a bunch of clothes piled on my dresser, and I'm like, all right, I'm a 36-year-old grown ass man. And you walk in my room and you look at the dresser and it looks like a fucking teenager lives there. You know what I mean? And I was like, why do I accept that as a standard? And it was so stupid, but it was like I had to go a layer down and be like, all right, do I want to be that messy guy? You know what I mean? Or do I want to be fucking squared away and dialed in? Like, what do I want my identity to be? Now, no one's really walking in, no one's going to see that, but that's a personal pride thing. So now every time when I get home from work, again, this is so stupid. It's a dumb example, but all right, I take my jeans off. I fold them, put them on a hanger, right? Every time. Like I do it right away. Same thing with like the dishes, right? It's little things. It's like, all right, have a little bit of pride in what you're doing. And that it's at an identity level. And for training, that one's an easy one for me, because I think, you know, that's always been a part of my identity. So I don't have to like really go deep on that one, because like we train just as what we do, and we want to maintain physical capabilities, and I want to be able to protect my family if shit ever goes down. So there's plenty of reasons there, but I realized I was a little bit sloppy in other aspects of my life, and I couldn't adopt good habits. And I was like, all right, this is so ridiculous. I'm dialed in a lot of other areas, but then I can't put my goddamn clothes away, and I'm 36 years old. So that one of the chapters in the book, I kind of extracted that theme. And it's been like a month, but it's really working really well. Like there's no clothes on my dresser right now. You know what I mean? Like I put the sweatpants away in the morning when I get dressed, and it's stupid, but does that resonate with some of the lessons you try to teach to your clients? And hopefully maybe for anyone listening that might like apply, and go read the book. I'm halfway through it. It's very practical, and they're short chapters. They're easy reads, but, what do you think about that?
yeah, Bear, that was such a beautiful example of exactly what I'm talking about. You know, your future self, you're probably pretty close to the, optimal future self you want to be. But there was one aspect of you that you're like, in the future, I don't want to be a person who is a slob, or however you define that. So my future self is somebody who keeps their shit tidy. And so by defining, who you want to be in the future, and then creating a standard that you live by to reflect that future self, these are the conversations I have a lot with people. What does your future self look like? Are you someone who drinks 6 beers every Saturday afternoon? Are you someone who prioritizes working out in the morning? By visioning and creating that version of yourself that you want to be, what do they do? What do they look like? What kind of mindset do they have? What thoughts, what do they tell themselves? Having an idea of who that is and who you're working toward being makes it a lot easier to then, create the standard and then set the strategies that will help you get there. And that is such a great example.
Julia, something I'd love to hear your thoughts on, because it's becoming more and more prevalent. And I think the field itself is expanding rapidly, and has huge implications as far as both personal health and then just the health of cultures too. And it's surrounding the gut microbiome. And it to me, I'd love for you to talk. And I think Hippocrates said this 2,000 years ago, is like, one man's food is another man's poison, or something. I probably slightly changed the wording of it, but I think with gut health and stuff, we're starting to recognize that like first off, one size fits all diets don't work, because for one individual, what might work for their like gut microbiome at that state of life may actually be unhealthy for another individual, or potentially healthy as well. But would love to hear your thoughts on that field as a whole, and then how on an individual level your gut microbiome like is influencing what actually is healthy for you, and how, and if you don't take the steps to like heal or kind of reset that, which there's different methodologies to do that as well, that you could put in some of the best food in the world. And yes, it's better than putting in greasy fried food, but your body still might not be optimally using it because you don't even have an ecosystem that knows how to break it down.
Mm-hmm. This is gut health to me in my mind, because you know how the more you know, the less you realize you know.
Yep.
This is kind of how I feel about gut health is, you know, nutrition and gut health is sort of part of my expertise and my education and my training, but I don't know shit about gut health. Like there's so much to know. And I do think, like you said, it's so variable individual to individual. You know, even what you're exposed to on a daily basis, what our gut health looks like as Americans, Canadians, compared to, you know, Africans, compared to Japanese. Like, I feel like you can't even do a study that would be representative of every single person on the planet. And, you know, I read a study out of Israel a little while ago. I can't remember what year it was published, but they basically took groups of people and measured blood sugar responses to the exact same meal. And like two people ate the same meal, and their blood sugar levels were variable person to person. Like, and the authors of this study were sort of like, you know, why do you think this might be happening? And some of their theories were around, you know, your predisposition and your metabolic capacity is one factor, but gut microbiome was also another thing that was raised as a potential factor. So even the way that we metabolize food, the way our bodies utilize the energy we're eating, certainly is mediated by the gut. What factors might contribute to making that better or worse, I think is very unclear. There are some patterns, though, that we know are important, like the importance of dietary fiber. It's pretty much, you know, there's a lot of conflicting research in nutrition science in general. You know, you might get one study on vitamin D showing that it has a positive effect on X, Y, or Z, and then the next study might have a negative effect. You know, a lot of the time there's very mixed results for different nutrition type studies, because it's very hard to do. For example, my baseline vitamin D might be different than yours. So how would we be able to do a study that assesses the effectiveness of a vitamin D supplementation? But something that's pretty unanimous and consistent, I've never really seen a study that shows a neutral, or maybe there's some neutral, but negative effect of dietary fiber. It's all unanimously positive. You know, those individuals who eat more fiber via fruits and vegetables, whole grains, typically show better health, you know, always show better health outcomes. So I think that does have to do with the fact we're feeding the microbiome, we're putting those, you know, compounds that are beneficial, including the fiber, but also maybe some of the micronutrients, in addition to like polyphenols and some compounds that we don't even really catalog or talk about, that will contribute to gut health. So,
and I fully want to acknowledge it. First off, I want to appreciate the fact that you kind of called yourself out and said like, hey, this field is so expansive, because I think anybody that even starts to dip their toe into it, even the pinnacle of people studying it are saying like, hey, we're at the very, very front of this. Like, we don't know. And of course we can speculate. But where it gets tricky, and you know this probably more intimately than anyone, is that you get corporations who know that there's money to be made off of it, and all of a sudden they have the answer. And of course, there's usually some validity towards like, even of course, probiotics and stuff, there can be an application, but there's definitely a level of certainty I see that makes me skeptical at times, because it's like, as you said, we just don't know enough. Now, there are things that I think there's a higher level of confidence, but kind of building off of what you said about fiber, something that I think is very much in kind of the zeitgeist of nutrition right now is the carnivore diet. And I can say anecdotally that like it actually works really well as a reset, meaning like I'll just give my exact example. Is like coming off the holiday, I think it was 2 years ago, like I had just been I think we had drank like 3 times in a 2-week period because family's in. We were still eating good, but just not as healthy as we typically would, not as balanced as we typically would. And so I tested doing it for a month, and now I've since done it a couple of times. And what I will say is that eating that diet for that month period of nothing but basically red meat, like you do feel a level of both mental clarity and then even digestive health was really good after the first like 8 days. So would love for you to talk on that, just kind of your thoughts surrounding that, because I am seeing more and more use when it comes to gut health of kind of reduction diets, which might be more just effective simply because you're eliminating. It's actually what you're not eating, not what you are eating. But would love to get your thoughts, because I've seen really good success too with like doing 4-day bone broth fast, meaning like a great reset of just having bone broth with salt for 4 days. And it's like you feel after then like you're digesting your food better. And that's even, this may sound weird to the listeners, but even looking at your poop after, like it's like, hey, there's something changed for the better here. So would love to hear your thoughts kind of surrounding that as well.
Yeah, this is really interesting conversation, and it comes up a lot. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of carnivore being a very useful sort of acute type treatment diet for some individuals. In clinic, we see it really effective for those who have gut related issues like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, candida, autoimmune conditions where, their immune system is sort of taken off and they have inflammation that's kind of out of control and their immune system is sort of like turned on, for lack of a better term, or hyper turned on. So by removing some of these foods that can be problematic, for example, take SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. When you eat plant foods and you have SIBO, a lot of the plant foods that we're eating start getting sort of fermented and broken down higher up in the GI tract, and that causes like insane bloating. For some people, it's bloating, discomfort, GI distress, lots of bowel movement irregularity, all that stuff. When we remove that, which is sort of like the trigger, their symptoms will go away and they perceive like, oh my God, I fixed something. The issue is with SIBO, for example, the bacterial overgrowth, the reason why that was happening is still persistent. So the carnivore diet is not like, the removal of the plant food is not the root cause of it. It's more like a trigger. So I do think for individuals who say, I have really good success in the carnivore diet, sometimes it is reflective of the fact their gut is just not optimal. And so they don't have the capacity, or they're having some kind of like root cause reason why digesting the normal plant foods is problematic. I would say that's a lot of people. And for every single patient who comes into the practice that I work for, most of your listeners, or maybe some of them, will know I work for Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who we have a medical practice. She practices with sort of a more functional, holistic approach paired with sort of conventional medicine. We do a really good job of bringing the two worlds sort of together. And I mean, we don't have one patient we don't run gut stool tests on, comprehensive stool tests. We test for parasites, we test for all kinds of things, because like you said, a lot of people's, chronic issues will start in the gut. And I'm not a physician, and so I can't really speak to this in like a really official stance, but from what I've seen in clinic where I'm collaborating with the physicians with these clients to address their nutrition, once we address like the candida that's overgrowing, which is a yeast that overgrows, or the SIBO, or someone has H. pylori, a lot of these are sort of like overgrowths, infections, things that are getting away on them in the gut that causes like downstream imbalance in the rest of the gut microbes. Once we address those like higher level issues, a lot of the time, all of these things resolve. And then you get back to a state where you can digest food properly. However, it could take, 1 to 2 years to get back to that point. Sometimes our gut repair protocols are three months, maybe even longer for some people, to even just start rebuilding after an infection or something like that, or a parasite that's been really virulent. So in my experience, the carnivore diet, I don't perceive to be something that someone should be on for life, because they do lack the fiber, the short chain fatty acids, some of these compounds that really encourage colonic health. So like health of the lower intestine and the bacterial populations that need that food to grow and be optimal. But I do think for a short period, or as a way to maybe address some of these symptoms, I think it's really, really good strategy. We implement it a lot.
And do you, when you're looking, you just referenced kind of like a 3-month approach to, and I forget the actual phrase you used, but like kind of a healing plan for your digestive system. Could you give, because I think another thing you called out that I personally don't think is being talked about enough is the things like parasite, fungal overgrowth. I know you mentioned a few, like it blows my mind because you can eat their specific diets for like fungal overgrowth, and like when you start to test those things, even if you're not somebody where it's blatantly obvious that you have that, it's like do some tests where you eat a diet that's specifically catered towards that, and you'll realize like, whoa, the mental clarity you feel and how these things are influencing you in a way that you don't, and not that you don't even know, but you'll start blaming other things. And that's what I love what you said of like, hey, get it upstream, because a lot of times there's a lot of little things that'll clear themselves up that it makes what you're solving for much less complex. But I'd love to kind of double tap on and of course, you don't need to lay out every specific of it, but if you can just kind of broad stroke, what are some of the principles of that 3-month plan to really get somebody that, and you could use a specific example of like, say you want to do a parasite one, because I'm sure they vary depending on what is found within your unique stool sample, but give us kind of the founding principle or the principles of what a good 3-month kind of like healing plan for somebody's gut looks like.
Well, I would say first it involves treating whatever the issue is. So this is like, treatment is first. And for something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that requires antibiotics. The best practice there is antibiotics. There are herbal protocols that can be utilized either in conjunction or as a stand-in for antibiotics. But I think the standard practice, at least from my perspective, is an antibiotic. So first line is if you do recognize there's a parasite, you have to treat it. And that can be, a couple days of a treatment. That could be 14 days of a treatment. It really depends on what's going on. And then once that gets treated, especially if you're using antibiotics, for example, then you just, you've done a number on your gut because you've had to kill some bacteria that are living in there. So you need to take a really kind of thorough and slow approach to rebuilding what you've kind of just zapped. So we implement things like probiotics, immune support for the gut, like through an IgG supplement, like with the immunoglobulins. We do prebiotics in that. We use peptides like BPC 157, oral peptide BPC 157. We will supplement specific probiotic strains sometimes, like Akkermansia, for example. So yeah, and glutamine, because glutamine is sort of like food for your gut, the cells of your gut lining. So we always provide glutamine as part of our repair rebuild protocol. Because if you think about your gut, it's only one cell thick. Literally, the barrier between the outside world and the inside of your body is one cell thick. It's kind of interesting to think about, like, your GI tract is actually outside the body. If you think about that, it's like what's in your GI tract is actually not in your body yet. It has to cross over those cells to get into your body, even though it's like in your body at the same time. That sort of messes with me. But that one cell is, sometimes they can be really compromised by chronic inflammation. Even high stress can compromise the integrity of that gut lining because it is so fickle. It's one cell thick. So really making a concerted effort to repair that after some of these really intense treatment protocols is super important.
Every morning, we wake up knowing what's at stake. Freedom, honor, duty. This is more than a mission. It's the oath we took. It's the flag we wear on our sleeve and everything it stands for. We don't do it for money, glory, or fame, but for something deeper. It's for our families, for our freedom, for our way of life. And to anyone who tries to take that away from us, good fucking luck.
Forward!
Born Primitive Tactical, for those who defend.
I want to ask, and I'll probably butcher this one again too, but Tony, we had a guest on it, and unfortunately I'm spacing on it right now because I got a freaking football brain, but it was all about kind of evolutionary biology and how that informs our food decision. I thought it was fascinating, very intuitive, the fact that like, if you just follow how we've evolved, our diet should match that. And any deviation from what we were eating thousands of years ago is basically wrong. You know what I mean? And it's going to cause, issues and all kinds of things that we see. And obviously all the artificial shit, of course, falls into that. And that would be the most glaring example. And then I've also seen things about, peoples who with different blood types respond to different things with inflammation. And I almost wondered, I'm kind of blurring the two right now, but we've got a few girls here at Born Primitive that have done the stool sample thing, and they did an elimination diet. Danny was one of them. And like, I haven't talked to her a ton about it, but from what I'm hearing, it was an absolute game changer. She got super strict and would isolate certain things and was able to pinpoint what was causing inflammation in her body. And as I understand it, those can be different with different people. And then there's the whole kind of eat for your blood type thing. So I'm wondering, kind of blurring those all three together, if based on where kind of our DNA evolved from in combination with a blood type, does that potentially have an effect on maybe, if I eat cantaloupe in the morning, maybe I get an upset stomach, but you eat cantaloupe and you're good to go, right? Because my DNA goes back to frickin' Scandinavia and all these places, you know what I mean? And yours is wherever, you know what I mean? And maybe they weren't eating cantaloupe up in Scandinavia, but where you lived, you had it. I don't know. I'm making obviously a generalization, but I guess, do you think there's any merit to, or I guess, is it pretty much a consensus that because you use the term you don't use a one size fits all approach. And to me, that's fascinating, but also a little overwhelming because you can't now just give blanket advice to people. And it really is going to take people to be very assertive with their own diet and nutrition to do these sorts of things. Like, Danny did the elimination diet. That was probably a total pain in the ass. Like, she had to cut out coffee and cut out this and all these random things and then be able to pinpoint, oh shoot, white rice destroys my gut or whatever. You know what I mean? I'm making that up. I don't know if that actually did, but now she's very clear on what she can eat. She has to be pretty strict on it, but she's had crazy results. So that was a lot, but unpack that a little bit. Do you kind of, emulate any of those things when you're working with individual clients? And does that carry any water, do you think?
Gosh. Okay. Let's talk about two things you said specifically just off the top. So I went to grad school for nutrition. I have a master's degree in nutrition, and never once in my entire training did we ever address the blood type diet. Like, none of my professors brought it up. We weren't trained to take that approach with our clients. So, and not to say that it doesn't have any merit, but I am unaware of any really valid science behind a blood type diet, nor was I ever trained in that. So I can't really speak to that aspect of it. This field of nutrigenomics, or genetics kind of sort of coming together with your nutrition, and there being some kind of relationship there between your genes and how you're supposed to eat. I think there is something maybe there, but I really don't know if there's good scientific evidence, really robust yet, to show that it has a ton of validity. And part of it, I do think, does come down to the gut. And I think our gut is very adaptable. So, for example, there's been studies to show that depending on if you're eating only plant-based proteins, for example, your body becomes better at extracting protein from the food you're eating over time, because it's learning that it has to get the amino acids that it needs out of the food you're providing. So your gut microbiome will adapt and adjust and change to be more effective at covering your baseline needs. Not to say that a plant-based diet is optimal for anyone, and not commenting on that, more just using that as an example to show that I think we're a lot more adaptable than maybe we think we are, and that there isn't maybe a diet that's meant for everyone. Do I think that there's probably some kind of genetic predisposition towards certain ways of eating for certain people? I do, but that's not based on any like really robust scientific evidence that I know of. It's more just like, I kind of agree with you. It's like a pattern that I've noticed. You know, some people like I live in Canada, and we have really, really high numbers of Indigenous populations up here. I live on like Blackfoot land. So, you know, traditional hunter-gatherer, my husband and I raise grass-fed bison. So we're really connected with like, you know, bison, ancestral ways of eating as it relates to bison. And I do think for this population, I mean, they've evolved eating bison on the prairies, and that being like the main part of their diet. So for those people, I do think like a diet heavier in animal-based products, probably a lot lower in carbohydrate, would be more appropriate for them. I do.
And Julia, do you at all try, because something Bear just said is important, and I think if you can find the scientists in yourself, and what I mean by that is like, there is no one answer for everyone as far as what foods are best. Now, there are principles, as you're saying, and certainly things like animal protein and whatnot. You can make the argument from an evolutionary biology standpoint, like we've been eating these things for hundreds of thousands of years. But when you look at like why I say like I think it's important to become your own scientist is like, if you're always looking for somebody to give you sound advice on your own body, there's always going to be a disconnect there, because it depending on the season you're in, and when I say season, I mean like your life, your stress levels, your like what your day-to-day looks like, how much time you're spending outside. I think it's constantly shifting, and I think even your adaptability is shifting based off things like stress, and like you can handle certain, if you're spending all day working doing manual labor outside, and this is all anecdotal, so let me just preface everything I'm about to say with that, is like you can handle food way different than if you're sitting in an office for 10 hours and then you eat crappy. Like, and of course now optimally you would be doing outside a lot, doing a lot of physical movement and eating healthy, but it's just a way to say like you have to get really in tune with kind of like what's working for you at any given time. And what's crazy though, and I'm sure you run into this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is that people actually don't want that level of ownership over their own health. They want to be told what they do. They want to be given an exact diet plan. And it's like, guys, the world doesn't work that way. And your body is this fascinating, magical thing. And as you build a relationship with it, then you can have some maybe little leniency at times, and it becomes much less rigid than this just like, they've almost start to separate their psyche from their body. And that's actually extremely, regardless of the healthy foods you put in, that's worse than putting the best foods in the world, is to start to separate and think like of your body almost as separate from yourself. So I know I'm kind of rambling there, but do you have any thoughts on empowering individuals to really kind of step into ownership over their own bodies?
Yeah. And that is what I largely try to do in my job, is really like, people fundamentally, they know sort of what's best for them. It's just letting them build the confidence and kind of bringing those to the surface so that they outcompete all of the crazy messages they're hearing on social media about how they need to do a ketogenic diet and intermittent fast at the same time and make sure they're, it gets really overwhelming. One of the big points of why people come to see us in the first place and why people seek out nutritionists is because they're just fundamentally confused. They don't know what to believe. And I do think that part of that does come down to, and people have varying levels of, I think this is sort of a spectrum, but your locus of control, where does that live? So for some people, they have an external locus of control. And this comes down to like your psychology, maybe the way you've been raised or whatever. It's like everything in your life is outside of you. So life happens to you. People need to tell me how to live because I fundamentally don't know, versus someone who has an internal locus of control is like, I have full control over everything that happens in my life. I am choosing every step of, including my health, but also everything else I do is internal to me and it's my choice. There are some people who just really don't have that fundamental understanding that internal locus of control does not exist for some people. And I think that's a psychological thing. Maybe they need to go to therapy. Maybe they need to address, deeper seated things. But this does just also go to show that nutrition is not being a nutritionist for a while now, I've really realized that it's very rarely about just the food. So it does come down to people's belief that they can do something, their self-efficacy, their confidence, their locus of control, like I was saying, and social media and everything that's out there, even the government developing guidelines for everyone that tells you how to eat fundamentally. Like, we're looking outside for the information of how we should be treating our own bodies. And I don't know what the solution is aside from, what you're saying, which is encouraging people to really look inward and dig inward for what fundamentally is going to be good for them, tuning into their own symptoms and the messages their bodies are sending. It's funny because I meet with people all the time and they say, I just, I'm eating every night at 8 o'clock. I'm starving. And then I go to the freezer and I grab the tub of ice cream and I'm overeating and they have all these words for themselves. Like, I'm a piece of shit. I don't have any self-control. My willpower just goes out the window after dinner. And it's like, hey, your body's actually trying to tell you something, is that you're still hungry. Let's ask why that's happening. And then as soon as you start approaching these signals from your body with curiosity and looking at them as signals versus like some behavior you need to assign a value to, then we start making progress. So yeah, there's a lot to talk about there, but I do think it's exactly that. Everyone's nutrition is going to be unique to them. And it could even just be the difference in your schedules day to day. What time you wake up versus what time I wake up is going to change the time at which I eat. And maybe the time at which I eat is going to impact the composition of my meals from a macronutrient perspective. So that the way that I eat is different than you, just because you wake up at 6 a.m. and I wake up at 10.
Well, and what you said is so powerful there too, and it actually relates to something you said at the beginning of the interview as far as the kind of the why, or I often reference on here about like the stories we're telling ourselves. You referenced it as like the why behind wanting to actually make change, because the ice cream example is so powerful because we create these conflicting relationships with ourselves that we think we're gonna habit our way out of, and it's like no, unless you get back to that story you're telling yourself, and like you said, like, that story could be as simple as like, I don't know why I have these cravings. I have no self-control. I love ice cream. It's like, flip that to like, hey, my body, which is an unbelievably magical system that we have very little understanding on a lot of levels, such as, we referenced one, gut health, even consciousness, things like that. It's like, maybe it's trying to tell me something. Like, that subtle flip from that to that, all of a sudden you're becoming your own doctor and you're asking questions and you're viewing your body as an integrated part of yourself as opposed to something that needs solved for. And that is something, it's wild. And I love the way you called out kind of the locus of control. I think that was a great way to conceptually kind of broad stroke that people do tend to fall, and it's a spectrum, but kind of fall in one bucket or another. And I have a question that popped up as you were saying that, because you strike me as a person that has very good self-awareness of like, okay, you're very knowledgeable. You went to school for nutrition, but as you're practicing, you're not somebody that can just put on the blinders to other variables that you see contributing to what you're trying to solve for as a nutritionist. And the question in there for me is like, how do you balance that? Because I'm sure for you, it's a struggle at times of like, wanting to educate yourself and get broader and make sure you're growing your tool belt so that you can help as much as possible. And I'm sure having a strong referral network that like, hey, this isn't my strength, but I know when to refer out. So the question for me is, that something you struggle with? Is like you said, once you start to know more, my favorite people in the world all say that is like, once you start to know more, you actually understand the lack of or knowledge you have. But to me, those are the wisest people, is like that understanding actually shows you're wise rather than pretending that you have all the answers or solutions for your clients. So is that something you struggle with? Is that as you actually work with more clients, like knowing when do I broaden my knowledge and help them, or how do I refer, or how do I make sure I'm helping them from all angles and not just having my hammer and pretending like everything's a nail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very difficult. And even from my perspective, we practice a muscle-centric approach to nutrition where we view muscle as like the target for health. And that involves, dietary protein being the answer to a lot of things, and resistance training being an answer to a lot of things. And so, like you said, those are my two big hammers. And sometimes, for example, for an elderly woman who's 76 and can't get the optimal amount of protein, my recommendations need to to adapt to her, and that, you know, my standard needs to change based on her individual situation. And so I do have to check myself. It's like, yeah, we would love to tell everyone 1 gram per pound of your ideal body weight is what you should be aiming for in a day. But for some people, it's just not going to happen. And okay, then what is our next best? Like, what will we accept? What will be the minimum effective dose versus the optimal effective dose? Thinking of things in that way. But it is really humbling to be in this space because it is ever evolving. There are so many incredible people with a lot of knowledge that I'm constantly learning from. And so to try and integrate that in a meaningful way, what I'm learning with my clients, I do try to do that. But really my biggest goal when working with people is just figuring out what they need. And helping them understand themselves better, because they don't have me forever. Like, you know, people work with me for 3 or 6 months and then sayonara. Like, unless you want to sign on for another program, most of the time, I'm really concerned about us building the skills you need to build so that when our time together is over, you have everything that you need to be able to like open your fridge and know what to eat. And know what to eat in a way that's going to meet your needs. So I do think this is part of why having a coach is so important, not necessarily just for nutrition, but for any area of your life that you want to, you know, improve in. Having a coach, someone who can be non-judgmental, who can help you ask the questions, is just so key, and removes a lot of the, you know, self-judgment, emotions out of it when you have someone who's sort of neutral to it all with you, working with you. Because nutrition can be a really emotional area for some, especially women who have, you know, been exposed to diet culture since they were 8 years old. Their mom put them on Weight Watchers. You know, you can't take emotion out of that. There's going to be a lifetime of emotion tied to them eating. And this could be women who are 60 in their 60s. You know, that persists. So to have someone who can be supportive and non-judgmental and start asking really neutral questions that isn't you is really, really important.
You approach it in such a healthy way as well. If like in because you just used the word coach several times, is like, to me, the best coaches actually aren't giving advice, meaning like that it's not about giving advice. There will be a time for that every once in a while, but it relates back to something we said like 10 minutes ago, is like a great coach actually just helps hold your hand to the answers that are already there, but you're too afraid to kind of look at. Like, people have an innate kind of understanding of what they need to do or things that they'd like to do. And a strong coach it has the uncanny ability to kind of go in and see what they can't, what they can feel, but they can't see yet. And that, I mean, it relates back to what you said earlier too, of that can be a future version of themselves. And they go in there and they say, hey, I see a version of you that like you're having trouble calling forward. Let me walk along that path with you just to show you that this path is here. So I love what you said there, because I think people get confused too with like a coach being like, no, there's a time for this too, of like, you need to do this, you need to stay more disciplined. And it's like, what I've found in my life, that works for a very small percentage of people, and a lot of times is unsustainable over time. Whereas like a good coach, you build not only a relationship with, but a trust, so that when they're not there anymore, that kind of they've empowered you to have that understanding, as opposed to needing this drill sergeant just yelling at you all the time, which is unsustainable over time.
Yeah. And I mean, the value of us as nutrition coaches is we help with the accountability piece up front, so that you can build those habits a little bit more effectively and that they stick. You know, it takes like whatever, 60 some days to build a habit. So if you're working with someone for 60 days, maybe 120 days at the most, if you can use them to leverage that accountability piece to get you to build that habit, or those sets of habits, that's really good. And I mean, a good nutrition coach or a good coach in general also provides education. You know, like I have a client who, I met with her yesterday. Her and her husband both diagnosed prediabetes. I could say, you need to go exercise, you know, you need to walk every single day, and now you need to resistance train 2 to 3 times a week. They're not even there yet. So what I did was provided them education on here's what prediabetes is, which their doctor would never explain to them. Here's what prediabetes is. Here's what it could lead to if it gets further out of control. here's why exercise is so crucial in turning your trajectory around. And so now she understands the fundamental, like, why it's important. So that next session, she has that to read through. We had a really good discussion about it. She's going to talk to her husband about it outside of our session. So that next session, when she comes, she's already bought in and understands why exercise is important. And then we add on, all right, now what are we going to do about it? What feels good for you to start out? Is it 1 time a week? Is it 2 times a week? It's like, if we just went to the intervention and I told her what to do, why would she stick to it? She doesn't know why she's doing it. She doesn't understand the justification as to why I would even recommend that. So giving people sort of meeting them where they're at, providing the education they need to give them that why, so that they fundamentally make the choice for themselves because they're educated enough to do that is super important too. And that's where social media is unhelpful, because it's a lot about here's what you should do, but sometimes here's what you should do isn't backed by anything. But also here's what you should do, but I'm not going to tell you where this comes from or why. You just should do it. It's like people just take that and then, I don't know, it's like it's like a big herd of sheep just kind of following each other based on what people are saying. It's kind of scary.
Well, it goes back to that going a layer down deeper, right? That really will resonate. And one thing I want to call out is just, there is so much information out there, particularly now that it's so accessible from social media, and there'll be all these fads, and then these people, do this 7-day water fast, and then do this and drink this kombucha. And like, there's so much out there. I think it might lead to a little bit of paralysis by analysis of like, I don't know what to do, so I'm just going to do nothing. And I think my lesson would be assertive in taking control of your own health and mess with the inputs a little bit, right? If you see something, if you see that 4-day bone broth fast, go try it, right? If you're really dialed, do some blood work beforehand and do some things afterwards that provide objective data to you that you can analyze. One example I'll give, and I don't need to put my tinfoil hat on here, but Tony and I, we've talked about it before. It's shocking the lack of nutritional foundation that doctors actually have in their education. And I mean, shit, I'll just say it. I think there's a reason for that. I think, doctors obviously love them. We wouldn't be where we are to have modern medicine. It's fascinating, and we're very lucky to live in modern times. But I feel like they are set up to just treat stuff with pharmaceutical drugs, and it's like, why are we not getting at the foundation of why these things are happening in they just have the solution. By the time you come to them, it's the solution. It's very little of, you need to cut out this and cut out that. Now, do they throw a little bit of that out? Yes, but it's not at a deep level. And I think that's backed by the pharmaceutical companies that really want everyone to be obese and inflamed and need all these things. But I won't go down that rabbit hole. But this was before I joined the military. I was big linebacker. I was 245 pounds, and the kind of the unit I was going into, I needed to be able to run further. I couldn't be a big meathead going into the training I was going into. So I was like, all right, I cut my weight. And I was working with the doctor on just like, I did a physical and did blood work and stuff because I wanted to be objective. I was like, all right, I think this could work, but I don't buy into the BS. I'm getting I got like 30 vials of blood drawn, and then I did this thing. It was basically paleo, with, a little bit of twist. But every morning I ate 8 eggs with like 6 strips of bacon with some raspberries. Lunch, ribeye steak with some raspberries, a few almonds, maybe a sweet potato. Dinner, big ass grass-fed ribeye steak, same thing. And that was my diet for like 8 weeks. Cut from 245 down to like 210. My mile time went to 5:10. It was like, not very good, like maybe 6:40. And I went back in and I redid all the blood. And I didn't tell the doc I was doing any of this. And he was an older guy. Ironically, he could barely get out of his chair. And he goes through the stuff and he was like, young man, what have you been doing? And I said, well, doc, you're probably not going to believe this, but every morning I wake up, I have 8 eggs and basically a half a pound of bacon. I eat a giant ribeye for lunch. I eat a giant ribeye for dinner, and I eat a little bit of fruit and some nuts. That's it. And I train my ass off. And he's like, there's no way. He's like, your cholesterol is perfect. This is he's like, this is one of the best blood panels I've ever seen. He literally was like fighting me. He thought I was messing with him. And I was like, no, that's exactly what I've been eating religiously for 8 weeks. And I can run through the, like my mouth, like I felt like a different freaking person. So the objective data didn't lie. I took the initiative to do, to mess with my own inputs based on kind of case studies that I had seen. I was in the CrossFit world, so that was kind of a big thing for the while, and it seemed to be working. Now I don't think it's sustainable because it's really hard to just do only that for to eat like 4 different foods forever, because you just get sick of it and you want a freaking cheeseburger eventually. But I thought that was interesting in that people become reliant on the so-called subject matter experts, but some of the people that carry the highest credibility, the people wearing the white coats, have very little actual basis for this. You know what I mean? They took 2 weeks of it in a 7-year curriculum, and now they're supposed to be giving us advice. And it's like, hey man, you're really good with prescribing me drugs that can fix this, but you're not good at telling me how I should live my life. And I just think that's the biggest thing. And that's the point I'm trying to make is you control your own destiny. You need to be assertive in controlling that. And if you're skeptical, try it or research it yourself. But obviously having coaches like you is a great resource, because that can be a place to go to start in that process, right? That's the first step, is taking the initiative, get with a coach. But know that not all coaches are created equal. Just because someone has 100,000 followers on Instagram and says they're a nutrition coach, drill down into, all right, what is your basis of knowledge? Maybe it's someone that's good looking, knows how to market on social media, and all of a sudden they're touted as an expert. Like, that could be complete bullshit. So that's what I'm trying to get at is I think, we appreciate our doctors, but I think that curriculum needs to be flipped on its head. And when someone comes in with high blood pressure, they shouldn't be talking about the 5 different pharmaceutical drugs they can get them on. They should be talking about lifestyle and not eating potato chips and these things like that. But that's a rabbit hole we could go down a really long time on why that exists, and the powers that be at a very high level that perpetuate that type of behavior, right? And I think you and I probably know the answer, but trying not to get banned by Spotify again for talking about diseases and shit. But yeah, I went a little long on that, but I think the bottom line is people just need to take control and try stuff. I mean, we're on this earth for 90 years? You got some time, so get to work, And
I mean, the argument is I don't have time. And my Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, she says this a lot, like, you don't have time to try to be healthy. You think you're going to have time to be sick?
Yeah, there you go. I love that.
And one thing I'm really inspired by all my clients and all the people I'm exposed to on a daily basis is just how many people are currently sort of in this relentless pursuit of their optimal health, which I think we all need to be in, because it is the precipice of life. Like, if you're not healthy, everything else is not optimal, right? And I mean, if you don't show up in the world in a way that you want to, how do you think you're going to thrive in your relationships, in your work? It's like it's a cascading thing. So to me, people who say they don't have time to figure it out and they just want someone to tell them what to do, it's like, that is such a I don't even know what the word is. It's like ignorant. It's just completely ignorant, really. It's like, you've got to commit the time. It's the most important thing in everybody's life, is to be healthy, because as soon as you don't have it, life's over, So I do agree with you. You need to relentlessly pursue your health. And people know deep down that they're not optimal. They're either pretending or ignoring those signals their body's sending them, or they're relying on someone else to tell them what's important for them, because they don't have the self-confidence or the ability to admit that something doesn't feel right for them. But I really do think it fundamentally comes down to self-mastery. Like, that is what life is about. It's about self-mastery. And self-mastery doesn't like somehow exclude your health. It includes it. And to me, it's one of the most basic forms of self-mastery. You need to get that right.
Love that.
Julia, before we hop off, I would love for you to have a chance to plug both if any listeners want to have a conversation, want to work with you, want to get access to the broader network that I know you're a part of. Where can they find you? Where can they find your clinic?
Yeah, so drgabriellelyon.com. We have a concierge medical practice and nutrition program. It's all telemedicine. And so you can go to drgabriellelyon.com, and I think there's like a button that says work with us, and you can fill out a form to become a patient or a client of our practice. We have 2 nutritionists on staff, me and another awesome nutritionist named Kayla. And then we have a couple physicians and a physician's assistant. So if you want more than nutrition, we definitely have that as well. And we do deep dive programs, which are like hybrids of, you get like all the functional testing and kind of preliminary meetings with a physician that will develop protocols for you based on your specific kind of physiology and biological needs and health concerns. And we pair that with nutrition coaching for 3 months so that people get kind of like a really well-rounded base of support. So we have some nifty programs that not many other kind of medical practices out there are doing. So yeah, drgabriellelyon.com. And then otherwise, I have Instagram. I'm sometimes really good at it, sometimes not, but it's at Julia the Nutritionist. So you can find me there, DM me if you have questions or whatever, or you would just want to connect.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on. For the listeners, if you are on the fence, we just gave you an out to go take action. So make sure you guys check that out. And I know you got a hard stop. I think we got it 1 minute, 20 seconds under the deadline. So we'll close out just how we timed it up. And hope you have a great weekend. And we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.